I still remember the day the letter arrived, how it sat there in the mailbox, untouched, almost humming with its own quiet promise. The envelope was heavier than it should have been, thick and pressed with a gold seal that caught the late afternoon sun just enough to make it seem unreal. My mother held it like a fragile relic, afraid that if she breathed too hard, it might vanish. She didn't know, none of us did, that sometimes the things cast the darkest shadows. When she opened it, the paper crackled in her hands. "We are pleased to inform you," she read, voice trembling. She never finished the sentence. Tears filled her eyes before the words could. In our home, victories were rare, delicate things. We had learned to hold them lightly, knowing they rarely stayed long. That night, the house swelled with neighbors, paper plates sagging with rice and stewed meat, cheap plastic cups of flat soda, and laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. They called me chosen. They called it a miracle. No one stopped to wonder what miracles sometimes cost. I kept the letter under my pillow that night, smoothing my hand over it as I lay staring at the cracked ceiling. The wind pressed against the house in long, lonely moans, and for the first time, I felt something I couldn't name, a hollow tug deep in my chest, as if the future I dreamed of was already pulling away from me. Sleep didn't come easily. Instead, I imagined marble floors and towering libraries, bright banners waving over carefully trimmed lawns. I imagined the woman who had built this place, standing proud, smiling, promising a future none of us had dared to believe in. A place where girls like me, girls born from dust and silence, could become something more. But dreams have a way of hiding the teeth behind their smiles. In the quiet hours of that night, before the first light bled into the horizon, my father sat beside me. He said very little. He never did. But as he stood to leave, he placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and spoke with the weight of a man who had seen too much. "Be good," he said, "and don't ask questions." I nodded, too young to understand, too young to recognize a warning wrapped in love. We left before dawn. As the car wound its way through sleeping streets, I watched the familiar world slip by, cracked sidewalks, rusted fences, windows still shuttered against the night. Each mile between home and the airport felt heavier, a slow shedding of everything I had ever known. No one spoke on the drive. Some silences are too thick to cut through. By the time we reached the academy gates, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the perfect lawns. The place looked like something out of a dream, towering, spotless, untouched. The kind of beauty that makes you forget to breathe. But not all beauty is meant to comfort you. Some beauty is meant to blind you, to hide what's waiting underneath. I stepped through those gates with a heart full of hope and a suitcase packed with everything I thought I would need. I didn't realize then, nothing I carried could prepare me for what was coming. The world we entered wasn't the world they promised. It was something else entirely, quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous. Even now, years later, the memories cling to me like a second skin. Memories of things we were told not to speak of. Things that crept into our bones when no one was looking. Some scars aren't visible, some never heal. What we were forced to endure still haunts me. They say your gut always knows before you do. Mine did. Long before I ever saw the gates, before I ever heard the rules, before the walls closed around us, something deep inside had already started whispering no. But I wanted it too badly to listen. The idea of the academy was bigger than anything I could wrap my mind around, not just a school, but a symbol. A sanctuary built by herself, standing like a promise on South African soil. A place the world called revolutionary. The newspapers spoke of it in gold and glass. A modern-day temple where the poor and forgotten would be reborn as leaders. And at least that's what they said. The brochures showed smiling girls in pressed uniforms, walking marble hallways under vaulted ceilings. Every image was polished, gleaming, not a hair out of place, not a single shadow in sight. But even as I pressed the glossy paper to my chest, even as my mother lit candles and whispered prayers over it, I felt it, that thin crack under the surface. The quiet wrongness humming like a wire pulled too tight. Maybe it was how fast everything moved after that. The selection, the tests, the interview, questions so personal they felt like the peeling of skin. Do you consider yourself obedient? Have you ever broken a rule to protect someone else? Would you sacrifice comfort for discipline? They smiled while they asked, but the smiles never reached their eyes. I told myself it was normal, that it was just what opportunity looked like, uncomfortable, invasive, sharp-edged. But late at night, when the house creaked and shifted around me, I would lie awake and wonder if I had made a mistake. If maybe some doors, once opened, can't ever be closed again. The academy wasn't far, just a few hours' drive, but it might as well have been a world away. As we packed my single suitcase, my mother tucked a Bible between my clothes without a word. My father himself with the car, checking and rechecking the tires, the oil, the engine. No one spoke about what was coming. Hope hung between us like smoke, and just as suffocating. By the time we pulled onto the long road leading toward Henley-on Klip, the world outside the window had gone still, like even the earth was holding its breath. The trees thinned, the air thickened. And there, rising out of the landscape like a monument to something I couldn't name, was the school. White walls, black iron gates, a place too perfect, too clean, too untouched, like a museum piece no one was meant to disturb. They told us it was built with the finest materials, funded with the best intentions. A place where girls were to be shaped into women of power, integrity, and influence. But as we rolled to a stop and I stepped out of the car, the ground felt wrong beneath my feet. Not solid, hollow, like something vast and empty waited just below the surface. I stood there, suitcase in hand, staring up at the building. The sunlight hit the windows, and for a moment it blinded me, not with brightness, but with something colder, something harder. I should have turned around right then. I should have listened to the voice clawing at the back of my mind, telling me that no place built to save you should ever make you feel this small. But I didn't turn. I smiled for the photos. I shook the offered hands. I stepped through the gates with my head high and my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was just nerves, just excitement. And I was wronged. Some gates don't swing open to welcome you. Some gates close behind you and don't open again. The gates closed behind me with a sound I'll never forget, heavy, final, like the shutting of a vault. From the moment I stepped onto the grounds, everything was ordered, precise, immaculate. The grass was trimmed to perfect uniformity, not a blade out of place. The air itself seemed thinner, as if the world here operated under different rules, different expectations. Our uniforms, crisp navy blazers, starched skirts, shoes polished to a mirror shine, were issued that same afternoon. They fit us without fitting us at all, stiff and foreign against our skin. We lined up in rows under the white sun, the instructors gliding past us, clipboards in hand, smiles drawn too tightly across their faces. At first glance, it was beautiful, breathtaking, even. Gleaming marble floors, soaring ceilings, dormitories that looked more like five-star hotel suites. But beauty can be a kind of camouflage. And once you looked closely, you could see it, the cracks, the places where the light didn't quite reach. Silence hung over everything. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, expectant kind. The kind that presses down on your shoulders and keeps your voice pinned in your throat. We weren't told not to speak, but somehow none of us did. The first night, they gathered us in the Great Hall, a cavernous room with vaulted ceilings and a chandelier that looked like it could swallow the moon. We sat in neat rows, hands folded, eyes forward, listening to the speeches. Words like discipline, leadership, sacrifice echoed off the polished walls. No one mentioned comfort. No one spoke of kindness. Later, in the dormitories, we whispered under our breath, not daring to speak too loudly. The walls were thin. There were cameras in the hallways, and though they didn't say it outright, it was understood. There were things you didn't do here, things you didn't say. Rules were everywhere, sewn into the fabric of our days. Wake up before dawn. Beds made with military precision. Inspections without warning. Eyes always watching, instructors, prefects, cameras that blinked red in the corners of the ceilings. If you broke the rules, even by accident, there were consequences. Quiet ones, private ones. The first girl was punished on the third day. She was late to the assembly by 5 minutes, no more, no less. They called her name over the loudspeaker. She didn't return to the dorm that night. No one told us where she went. No one ever asked, and it was safer that way. There were other things, too, things harder to name. The way the instructors smiled at you when you made a mistake, not cruel, not angry, but patient, expectant, as if they were waiting for you to break, as if breaking was part of the plan. And over time, you learned, it didn't matter how smart you were, how kind or clever or good. It only mattered how well you followed, how quiet you could become. We were called scholars, leaders in training, but the truth was simpler. We were being molded, pressed into shapes we didn't choose, carved down to fit into boxes we hadn't built. They called it a privilege, but it didn't feel like a privilege. It felt like a slow erasure, a careful, deliberate stripping away of the things that made us who we were. By the end of the first week, we smiled on command. We spoke only when spoken to, and we moved through the halls like ghosts, careful not to disturb the perfect silence. Somewhere along the way, we stopped asking questions. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being girls. It didn't happen all at once. There was no loud moment, no crash or scream to mark the beginning of it. Things shifted slowly, carefully, so that you hardly noticed how the ground was moving under your feet until it was too late to find your balance again. At first, it was small, little instructions folded into the day, expectations that tightened around us like invisible strings. There were rules, of course, always rules. The schedule carved our days into neat pieces: wake before dawn, line up in silence, meals eaten without laughter or conversation. Every step was measured, every movement observed. Even the smallest slip, a missed button, a wrinkled collar, a glance held too long was noticed. When someone made a mistake, there were no shouts, no visible scolding. There was only a gentle hand on the shoulder, a soft-spoken name, and then they were led away. They disappeared from our rows, from our dormitories, from the small, fragile webs of friendship we tried to spin in the quiet hours before lights out. Sometimes they came back, sometimes they didn't. We didn't ask where they went. We learned quickly that asking was dangerous. If you did, if your curiosity got the better of you, there was reflection. They never explained what it was. The word itself was spoken carefully, deliberately, as if it carried far heavier weight than its sound suggested. When it was my turn, they led me to a room stripped of anything human, 4 blank walls, a chair bolted to the floor, a single bulb hanging overhead, its light sharp and unkind. They took my shoes and my blazer and left me there without instruction, without comfort. There was no clock on the wall, no window to measure the passing of time. Only the buzzing of the light above me and the slow unraveling of my own thoughts. They didn't need to shout or threaten. The stillness did their work for them. By the time they opened the door again, hours or days later, I couldn't tell, I had learned that questions were dangerous. That thinking too much, feeling too much, could cost you more than you were willing to give. And yet, reflection was only one part of it. There were the assemblies held in the great hall, where the air seemed thicker, heavier, the light from the chandeliers dim and cold. We stood for hours, our feet numb in our shoes, repeating phrases fed to us in a steady, unyielding rhythm. I am grateful. I am disciplined. I am loyal. Over and over until the words ceased to have meaning and became something else, a drumbeat beneath the skin, a chain around the heart. If someone faltered, a slip of the tongue, a wavering voice, the instructors would pause. The room would tilt into silence, and the girl would be escorted out, her absence swallowed by the void she left behind. We would lower our eyes and continue reciting, each syllable another stitch sewing our mouths shut. Sometimes girls would collapse where they stood, their bodies giving out long before their wills did. But the rule was clear: you did not move to help. Compassion here was considered a weakness, a crack in the foundation they were building. We stood still. We watched. It didn't end in the halls. At night, after the lights snapped off and we lay in our beds staring at the dark ceilings, the academy seemed to shift again. The walls that looked so solid in the daylight leaned closer. The silence grew heavier. Footsteps passed our doors, slow, deliberate, never in a hurry. Sometimes a name would be whispered, and a girl would rise from her bed, slippers brushing the floor, and follow the voice into the waiting dark. Most returned by morning, some didn't. We told ourselves stories to fill the silence, that they were given extra tutoring, that they were being corrected, that they were undergoing training for something better, something higher. We needed those stories to survive, needed something to believe in, because the alternative was too large, too monstrous to name. And the instructors, they were always there, watching, smiling the same tight, patient smiles. They spoke to us about excellence and duty, about how lucky we were to have been chosen. They said the world was waiting for us to become leaders, that our suffering would mold us into women strong enough to change the world. But even then, even when I repeated their words and nodded at the right moments, I knew the truth growing inside me, quiet and certain. We weren't being prepared for greatness. We were being reshaped, whittled down, carved hollow to be filled with what they wanted us to be. Somewhere along the line, I forgot how to raise my hand, forgot how to speak without permission, forgot how to think without fear. In time, we all did. The academy didn't have to break us, it taught us to break ourselves. When I finally left the academy, it wasn't in triumph, the way they had promised. There was no celebration, no great unlocking of doors into the future. We packed our bags quietly, folding uniforms we would never wear again, tucking away textbooks heavy with underlined words and hollow promises. Outside, the world had shifted while we had been gone. Friends from before treated me differently, some with awe, others with suspicion. Family asked careful questions, glancing at me like they didn't quite recognize the girl who had come home. I didn't recognize her either. For months, I couldn't sleep without the lights on. Even in the safety of my own room, I would wake to phantom footsteps outside the door, the shadow of a whisper threading through the dark. My body tensed at small sounds, a door creaking open, the scrape of a chair, the faint hum of a light bulb flickering overhead. Simple things confused me. Freedom confused me. I stood too straight. I answered questions I hadn't been asked. I apologized for things that weren't my fault. I waited for permission that never came. It wasn't just a habit. It was something deeper, carved into the soft parts of me where no one could see. A reflex born from survival. When people asked about the academy, I smiled the way I had been taught, polite, measured, eyes lowered just enough to seem humble but not ashamed. I spoke of opportunity, of leadership, of gratitude. I repeated the phrases that had been drilled into us until they no longer tasted like lies. Because that's what they wanted to hear. That's what they needed to believe. No one wanted to know about the silences, about the girls who disappeared, about the dreams that had been peeled from our bones like old paint. We were success stories, proof that the system worked, and so we played our parts. In job interviews, I spoke with perfect composure. In classrooms, I sat straight-backed and silent. In crowded rooms, I smiled and nodded and made sure I took up as little space as possible. People praised my discipline, my dedication, my drive. They didn't understand that what they saw wasn't strength. It was damaged, stitched carefully into a shape the world admired. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and the wind pressed against the windows, I would sit on the edge of my bed and wonder if the academy had succeeded after all. Not in saving us, but in hollowing us out, making sure we would never speak too loudly, never reach too far, never dream in ways they hadn't approved. They had promised us the world, but somewhere along the way, they took our voices instead. And on the outside, the academy sparkled. It gleamed under the weight of awards and headlines, the sheen of celebrity endorsements and smiling photo spreads. It stood as a monument to what they called hope, a testament to the power of opportunity, the redemption of forgotten girls plucked from poverty and polished into something palatable. People spoke our names with pride, attaching them to speeches and dinner conversations like ornaments, proof that the world was, perhaps, not as cruel as it sometimes seemed. They said we were lucky. They said we were living proof that dreams could be handed down like gifts from generous hands. And for a while, I tried to believe them. I smiled for photographs. I sat on panels and gave speeches at small community gatherings, my voice steady, my words careful. I talked about education, about discipline, about what it meant to be given a chance. I talked about gratitude. But the truth was, and still is, that gratitude can be a cage too. Behind the polished images, behind the carefully curated narratives, there were girls who never came back. There were whispers that never made it to the polished conference tables and gala fundraisers. There were nights of waking in the dark with the taste of metal in your mouth, the feel of invisible hands shaping you into someone smaller, quieter, less dangerous. None of that made it into the brochures. No one wrote about the reflection rooms. No one spoke about the drills that pushed our bodies past exhaustion and then further still. No one mentioned how the walls seemed to close in at night, how the silence was not peace but punishment. And we didn't tell them, how could we? To speak would be to betray the very narrative that had been built on our backs. We owed them silence, didn't we? After everything they gave us. Besides, no one wants to hear that the dream they bought into was built on the broken voices of the girls they swore they were saving. It's easier to believe the story they were told. It's easier to look at the polished marble floors, the manicured gardens, the gleaming halls, and call it good enough. And maybe that's the hardest part, carrying the weight of that silence, smiling under it, nodding when they call you a success, when you know that somewhere deep inside, something was taken from you that you will never, ever get back. The world sees what it wants to see. We learned that early. We learned to let them. Some stories do not end. They fold themselves into the quieter spaces of your life, slipping between the ordinary moments, hiding beneath the weight of hours and days, surfacing only when the noise of the world dies down and you are left alone with the hum of your own memory. I once believed that leaving would be enough, that crossing those gates meant closing the door behind me for good. But some doors are not made to close, and some places are not built to release what they have claimed. Time passes differently in the memory of that place. It is slower, heavier, filled with echoes that no distance can quiet. There are days when I find myself repeating the old words without realizing it, a whisper at the back of my throat. I am grateful, I am disciplined, I am loyal. Each phrase worn smooth from the 1,000 times we said them. Each one hollow and echoing in the spaces where other thoughts used to live. There are nights when sleep does not come easily, when I lie awake listening to the house settling, the soft creak of wood, the hum of electricity in the walls, and every sound feels too loud, too sharp, pulling me back to dormitories lined with beds all made the same, to hallways where footsteps passed in the dark without faces, to doors that opened and closed without warning, and to the silence that swallowed everything whole. They said we were chosen, handpicked to be shaped into something greater, sculpted with discipline and excellence. But there are shapes that require the breaking of bones, the splintering of what once held you together, and not all things can be rebuilt once they are broken. We learned early that survival meant silence, that questions were dangerous, that dreams needed to be smaller, quieter, easier to carry without drawing attention. We learned to smile without joy, to speak without saying anything at all, to disappear in plain sight. And we learned these things so well that even now, years later, they live inside us, stitched into the lining of who we have become. Out there, the world saw something else: bright photographs, shiny medals, the polished surface of success, but surface things hide what runs deeper. And behind every award, every handshake, every rehearsed speech of gratitude, there is a girl still standing somewhere between then and now, caught in the soft collapse of all the things she was forced to leave behind. No one asked what it cost. No one wanted to know. It is easier to believe in miracles than to see the machinery behind them. Easier to applaud the outcome than to understand the weight of what was lost along the way. We were told we were lucky, but luck is a cruel thing when it comes wrapped in silence, when it demands you erase yourself piece by piece just to wear it properly. There is a kind of silence that is louder than screaming, a kind of erasure that leaves fingerprints behind. And long after the gates of that academy disappear from view, the marks they left remain, invisible but indelible, stitched deep where no eye can see. Somewhere behind those gates, the parts of us that were not useful enough, not quiet enough, not obedient enough, they remain. Waiting, watching, silent, because not all doors are meant to be reopened. And not all scars are meant to be healed. Some of us walk away, some of us never really leave. If you know that feeling, speak in the comments and share this with someone who might still be waiting in their own silence. Like, subscribe, and stay close. There are more stories still unfolding.